And I tell you what, Kevin was busting my chops earlier about this hairline that I have. And Ridgebrook is one of those deals that ultimately creates the hairline. So we're going to dig into it today. Not every deal is going to go to pro forma. We've been talking about it, right? The only thing that I can tell you about a pro forma when we send it out is it's definitely going to be wrong. And this is one of those deals. Also, we've got, I'm an ardent follower of the old Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger. And Charlie Munger's got this great quote about Berkshire. Whenever they invest in a business, they keep the management in place. And he says, look, I wouldn't have invested in the business if I didn't think that it was going to go well. So you don't have to send me all the sunshine and rainbows and the fun stories and all the good stuff that you got going on. Just tell me what's going wrong so that I know that, send that quickly so that I understand it, and then we can process and try to solve those problems. And that's what we're going to do today. Ridgebrook's one of those deals that didn't start off on the right foot, and we're going to show you kind of how a handful of things here. We're going to talk about a gigantic, large-scale acquisition, 700 spaces, very, very large transaction, like moving a cruise ship. But how, the stewardship mindset and putting a high-quality strategy in place ultimately leads to that stability that we've been talking about throughout the entirety of the weekend. So we're going to walk through where we struggled, like Bronson said. We're going to talk about how we responded, what the numbers say today, and ultimately where we're going in the future. With that, Kev, we'll toss it over to you, bud. Let's take us back to the acquisition. First and foremost, how did we underwrite Ridgebrook, and give us maybe some of the key assumptions leading into this respective transaction?
Yeah, sure thing. So, it's been a couple years, but ultimately when we, I think a couple things to point out with Ridgebrook when we first came across it is like this was a period of time when, a lot of other buyers were like pencils down. They had liquidity issues, struggles in the marketplace, and historically, this is one area I didn't cover on my presentation. Is historically, we've always had a great track record. When we say we're going to close, we're going to close. We're going to get a deal done. This Ridgebrook was a behemoth for us in comparison to maybe other deals that we've done, and very much institutional quality property. In a market where Sun Communities owns, Yes owns right down the road from us, SSK, which is the largest operator in Kentucky, and then they've got big holdings in Indiana. And so you definitely have some big players in that marketplace, but a lot of them, again, were pencils down for various reasons at that point in time and weren't in a position to buy. Our reputation really, kind of came to the forefront at that point, to where, we were known by brokers as we get the deal done, we don't retrade, we don't mess around, we don't play games, and ultimately this came to us. And so it was a very pivotal moment in our business to where not only was it a great opportunity and a great market at what I feel was a great basis, it was also one that really helped put our name on the map. As one of the, in the grand scheme, we're still a smaller operator, right? There's groups out there that own 20, 30, 40, 50,000 lots. And so in the grand scheme, we're still small operators, but it really helped us put our name on the map of Sunrise and our ability to execute and, do what we say we're going to do. And so back to some of the assumptions, when we looked at the deal, one of the big takeaways was our ability to buy it for what we felt was a below market basis. And so historically, we looked at the transactions that occurred in and around the Fort Wayne and Indianapolis marketplaces. And for a similar quality type property, they typically have traded for in the $70,000 to $75,000 per lot range, right? Like that's what Yes and some of those other big groups have paid in the past. And so when we were negotiating the deal, we landed on a price point that ended up being roughly about $55,000 a lot. So we knew that going into it that we had a very attractive basis. As far as assumptions on rents, another key area that we thought was very compelling is that there was roughly, there was about 630 or 40 lots that were occupied out of the 738. I think I'm getting the numbers right here. So there's roughly about 100 lots that were vacant. And the group that we bought it from, they had started going through a transitional phase, trying to get this park up to what they felt was market. And the market at the time was in I believe the high 500s, maybe 575, give or take. And they had already successfully proven that concept with about 100 of the existing residents that lived there. And so we knew that was already kind of proof in the pudding, and that we knew that we could get the remaining occupied lots up to that market. That was already set. They already set the precedence there. And so we knew that we'd be able to achieve that upside over a period of time. And, Brian, to your point, some other of the assumptions here, we assumed that this, being that it was so large, we really dove deep into understanding some of the the unique dynamics that were taking place with prior operations and what that was going to mean for us when we stepped into it. And one of those big ones was how many, not just CapEx for what we were going to, where we were going to spend on improvements in the property, repaving roads, trees, playgrounds, pool upgrades, clubhouse, all that stuff. Like that's a given. But one of the other areas that we really tied some strong assumptions to and put forth quite a big budget, where I think this could have absolutely crushed somebody else that didn't really plan ahead for it, was their turn rate. So like they had, they were, I forget the exact number, they were turning a number of residents, looking back at their T12, they were turning quite a number of residents on a monthly basis. And so when you turn somebody, if it happens to be a park-owned unit, you're going to have to go back in. You're going to have some carrying costs when it's vacant. You're also going to have rehab costs or renovation costs to get it back online and get it sold. And so, and when you look at the size and scale of this property, like I knew that was going to be a very big number. So we went into it knowing that we were going to spend quite a bit of money on CapEx, over $4 million that we had scheduled out over a span of over 4 years. And so, outside of that, Brian, I think and I'll shut up after this. But as far as infill, we saw an opportunity with the vacant lots that were there. So these were already developed lots. Infrastructure was there. There might be some upgrades to electrical pedestals and things like that. But generally speaking, all the infrastructure is there. These lots had homes on them at some point in the past, and so we knew that it was going to be it's never an easy lift to bring homes in, but we knew that we wouldn't be dealing with like regulatory challenges or municipal problems trying to get approvals. Like it's kind of hey, when we're ready, we can bring these homes in and infill these lots and start generating additional revenue. And what made us confident about that was that when we did a market study, again, there's lots of big players in that market, some smaller players as well, but the average occupancy was 94% in all the MH communities in that local marketplace. And so we knew that the demand was there. It was already proven from the other professional operators, and we knew that just over time we'd be able to achieve that upside and infill those homes and generate additional value for our partners. So
yeah, no, much appreciated. Thanks for the additional color there. So maybe just reiterating a couple of points here. So when we bought that respective transaction, talking about the basis we were going in, felt like we were going in at a good basis, below the current market value, but well below the intrinsic value of the asset, knowing that we've got 100 vacant spaces that we can infill, and we have the ability to recapture the loss to lease in due time. Won't happen overnight, but we know that there's some room to run. Felt pretty good about that. And then going back into the lot rent. So when we purchased it, the lot rents were in the mid 400 range.
481, I think, to be exact.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and we've subsequently in the first 2 years, when you look at it, lot rents at the 2-year mark averaged 548. That was in the pro forma, and we finished after 2 years right at 552. So right around that mark. Give us a little color on kind of what drove that in the first couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what improvements we made that we felt confident to
Correct. A little bit of color there, and just
again, I think it's not rocket science. I mean, I think the data really speaks for itself. Again, we did a market study. We knew what the other competitive parks, where they were at in the marketplace with the rents. We knew that they didn't have a lot of vacancy in the market. So like someone couldn't simply move their home into another community and save $300 a month, right? We were one of the lower priced communities in that market, but we are in a great location, great part of the market. Literally, when I say we're right across the street from a very large, prominent community owned by SSK, who's a big group, and then right down the same road on the same street from Yes Communities, and then a mile away from a Sun Community. And each one of those were, in the high 90% occupancy. So, and at much higher lot rents, lot rents that were very close to what we had deemed to be market. And so we knew that going in, that if we did our normal improvement plan, go in and breathe new life into it, again, turn into a place that the residents are happy to be at, proud to raise their family at, put the amenities in. Like this place was pretty worn out. The two groups prior to us, they kind of just went in and did I guess what you could say is a turn and burn, right? They each made money, but they never really finished the plan. They never really finished out the program. And so, they kind of just took their money and ran. They didn't really, the pool wasn't even operational when we took it over, was. I mean, this is a big community with a lot of kids. The pool literally didn't function. It was covered up and hadn't functioned for like 2 or 3 years. So, we knew that if we put all those pieces of the puzzle back in place and made the improvements, that folks would be happy, and they would be very happy to pay a higher than current lot rent. So, and again, if they moved to another community that probably doesn't have the same amenities, they would be paying the same amount anyway. Correct. So I just felt very confident in the business plan that if we just did what we say we're going to do, we're going to be able to achieve that upside.
Yeah. So the concept is folks are, we've come to learn that folks are willing to pay a little bit more on a monthly basis for a better living experience. So Todd, we'll kick it over to you, bud, and maybe talk about some of the friction points and some of the difficulties that we uncovered shortly after acquisition. So Kevin said, he tosses you the deal, like no big deal, and Todd just makes all the magic happen. After we pass you the rock, we close the transaction. Give us some of the color. What was the friction points that hit us right in the face shortly after acquisition?
This was literally Todd's first month in the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Out of the frying pan into the fire.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, first month. Welcome to Ridgebrook. Here we go, right?
Welcome to Sunrise, welcome to Ridgebrook.
And just so you guys know, I was supposed to be in the middle because you see Brian's head and then mine a little bit and then pretty boy over here, but, I decided to take the end of it, but that's all right. Hey, look, quickly after, Kevin always says it's what you don't see, right? And that was truly what we saw with Ridgebrook. It's as we peeled back the layers of the onion, it's what we couldn't see maybe in the due diligence process. No matter how hard that we do it, it's what you don't see, and it's the utility infrastructure. It's the lines, the meters. Not knowing that 3/4 of the meters were misassigned, which means that they're not getting accurate billing aspects. Knowing that half the meters don't even work, right, and aspects like that. So for us, it was truly infrastructure as to below the ground, what we couldn't see, pedestals that were going bad that, again, we just wouldn't be able to see in a property like this during the due diligence aspect. That was some of our biggest hurdles.
Yeah, fair. And, many of you have heard us talk about the fact that whenever we close a deal, we like to try to get all the skeletons out of the closet over the course of the first few quarters prior to making outbound distributions to partners. And it's for the exact same reason that Todd's talking about here. No matter how much diligence we do in advance, you just never know. We're buying a lot of these deals from mom and pop operators or unscrupulous folks in kind of a unique, non-consolidated niche. And for that reason, you've just got to make sure that you protect yourself. And again, that goes back to kind of the structure that ultimately leads to the stability downstream.
Yeah, I was going to expand a little bit. I think you just glossed over, but it was a little bit more of a crazy show than what he just outlined there in the first couple of months. So part of the negotiation when we took this over was that the selling group, which normally doesn't happen, but they wanted to keep their staff and take their staff somewhere else. Like that was their plan. And as you can imagine, that creates quite a challenge for us, right? Stepping into such a behemoth, any community size, right? But especially one of this size, to step in, literally, there's a lot of intel that exists with current staff. Like they know where some of those skeletons hide. They can help us work and sort through some of those challenges that we don't have to head into. And so we negotiated with the seller that they would agree to keep that staff there for 6 months. That would give us a transition period. Let us work out some of the kinks. Hire, train new staff to basically transition them out. And long story short is, I don't know, was it 2 weeks in? I remember where I was. I was at my son's football game, and I get a call from Todd telling me that the staff all this left. That they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. They moved all their staff out, took every computer, took every printer, took every piece of intellectual property, took it away, and this was on a Friday night, I think, because we had football. So basically, couple weeks in, and essentially no staff to run a 700+ space community. Todd and his team stepped up to the plate, hopped on planes, did their thing, and basically we put the Band-Aid in place for. It's not just hiring one community manager. Like this community has an entire staff. It's got a community manager, assistant community manager, maybe even a second assistant community manager, sales and leasing agent, maintenance staff, and all that. And so it was quite a fire drill, literally just a few weeks into it. So that was that was one of the first things that went wrong. And then there was a lot that went right, but there was definitely a few things that really punched us in the face a little bit. That was the first one, and we got through it. You guys kicked ass and stepped up, and we've got good staff in place, and we're still we've had some staff turnover and challenges, but ultimately. I think we righted that part of the ship, but again, as you said, there was other skeletons that popped out over time.
Yeah, I was going to double click into the staffing on site. So you gave a quick run through there, but it's important to note that the size and scale of this community is one of the largest in the entire country. It's top 1% of the entire country in terms of the cumulative number of units on one respective property. So given that, Todd, could you just maybe add a little bit of color in terms of the type of staffing that's needed to run such a large operation? A little color there, and then maybe talk about the trials and tribulations that we've had in finding the appropriate staff over the first couple of years?
Yeah, throughout my career, I've actually only had 2 other communities larger than Ridgebrook. To tell you just the size of it, right? Our average community about 150 sites, so it's like us really putting 5 or 6 communities into this one, typical for us. But the other aspect is when Ridgebrook was first built, it was built into 2 separate communities. And then you got some city streets like running down the middle of it, add some complexity, right? There's only one office, which is on the far side for, so almost an 800 site community. Makes it a little bit challenging from an operation standpoint. And then at some point, they were merged into one. So when you have a property this size with this big of a landscape, right, you need the infrastructure in place to be able to handle not only the residents coming in, but also, as we mentioned, the future vacant lots, just the turn in the infill and whatnot. Traditionally, for a community this size, you'll normally have a community manager. You'll have 1 or 2 ACMs, assistant community managers. If you're 100% full, you probably don't need your sales and leasing agent. But in this case, where this community was averaging anywhere from 8 to 12 turns a month, right? And so if you think about that, in order for us to stay ahead of the game of that, we have to occupy 13, 15, 17 homes a month in order just to stay ahead of this, right? So in this case, we do have a sales and leasing agent on site, and not to only mention about the new homes that we're bringing in as well, right? So, and then with that, you may have 1 maintenance, 2 maintenance folks, and a groundskeeper. A lot of common area here, a lot of green, a lot of mowing and snow and all that fun stuff. So in theory, a community this size, you'd say, hey, 1 CM, 2 ACMs, an SLA, and potentially, 2 maintenance and a grounds.
Yeah. And, if you guys recall back to Todd's presentation, you looked at the regional VPs that we have. Each of the individual regional VPs has 5 states underneath them, right? 5 states on the first one, 5 states on the second one. You get to old Amy. Amy's got 1, just the 1, because there's so much work here inside of this property. And what we kind of uncovered and what we discovered was just by bringing in what we would say maybe traditional community management was insufficient. We needed to bring in more talent there on site. So we brought in Amy, more of in a regional VP style role. What's the terminology you're using?
Yeah, Amy comes in as our area manager.
Manager, yeah.
We have 2 properties right there. We've got Ridgebrook, and then we got Miami Village right down the street. And she kind of oversees those boots on the ground just because, we call it the Beast of the East. Even though it's not really in the East, we still call it the Beast of the East just because of the complexity of that.
Yeah, so that role allows her to continue to grow her professional skill set, a higher talent coming on board with further experience, et cetera, that eventually can move into a regional VP style of role. But talking about, we had a little bit of turnover, but we now got a great staff in place. You talked a little bit about the turn inside of the units, right, where we're turning 8 to 10 on a monthly basis. And I tell you what, that's I would say less than traditional in our crazy world of manufactured housing. It's very sticky, but we've had a little bit more turnover there than what I would say would be commonplace. Let's walk through kind of maybe why that is the case. We uncovered some unique things associated with the credit quality of the tenant base in the first few quarters of owning that asset. Could you maybe walk through the dynamics of that?
Yeah, sure. Again, as we peel back some onions, right, and we see some of those layers, you always have, as you've maybe switched through ownership over the last couple of years, right, there's always a push for occupancy as sellers go to sell properties. And same thing, right, which we've seen. You bring them in, a very quick verification program, and you get them in. And with a very high rental base at Ridgebrook, along with some of the internal LTO programs that they had, you just have that natural turn to where most communities on a rental, you're turning 24 to 36 months, give or take on an average turn. Here at Ridgebrook, we were seeing 12 to 16, 18 was not uncommon for that. The other part too is, a lot of these folks were high delinquency balances. So when we came in, they really didn't have a collection process in place to ensure that they're collecting what they're supposed to each and every month, right? So as we processed our collection, that just highlighted the amount of folks that were severely, what we like to say, 60, 90 plus days behind. And as we started to process our collection, and we worked through that, we started to see those high number of individuals start to turn either through, they turn in the keys, the evictions, whatnot. You know, a small percentage of that was resident-owned homes. But for the most part, they were truly just the rental base and the tenant-owned homes. And so, you know, we're working through that. And now, you know, when I say we took over 8 to 12 turns a month, we're falling into the 3 to 6 turns a month as we're starting to work through this, bring in better qualified residents, right, in the communities. We're starting to finally see some of that backlog of them just really pushing to get occupancy regardless of that residents' criteria and whether or not, you know, we should approve them or we shouldn't. We're starting to see that slow down now as we start now to work against our own numbers, right? And we have we run a very thorough background, a very thorough approval process, community approval process for folks to come in, both on the rental side, but also on the resident-owned side as well. So that's where a majority of our cleanup, you know, is coming from, is strictly that.
Yeah. I was going to maybe kick it over to Kevin, maybe talk a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper in terms of maybe what would be traditionally referred to colloquially as a pump and dump for a guy doing a quick value add. And ultimately, once we kind of uncovered the credit quality of some of the residents in the first couple of quarters, and we had a little more turnover, let me walk through the process of digging deep in the numbers from an asset management perspective with Sam in terms of how we began to right the ship and understand maybe what the end game would look like and how long it might take to ultimately right the ship, given we saw those flags. We saw some of the turnover in the first couple of quarters. Walk through that process.
Yeah, and we saw, you know, in due diligence, we identified the turnover as a big piece, and that's why we allocated quite a bit of CapEx dollars, knowing that each one of those units, as they turned, that we would have to put rehab dollars back into them to get them back online. So we knew that going in. What we didn't know were maybe the deeper reasons why their turn rate was so high. We anticipated that it would last for, we'd be able to maybe right the ship in 2 years, but we didn't have absolute clarity as to why it existed in the first place, why they were turning so many units. But ultimately, you know, we learn as we go. We try to learn something new every time we do a deal, and try to, again, flush out all those skeletons. But what we identified shortly after taking over in the first probably couple of quarters was that they had lowered, at some point prior to selling, they had lowered their credit standard, as Todd said. So they lowered their credit standard for applicants, and basically, you know, if you could fog a mirror, you could move into the community. And so like that ultimately led us to put some additional steps into our due diligence process, right? Like we always take a look at age receivables, we take a look at the balance sheet to find out like what are they putting into expenses, what's actually just being capitalized that we're not seeing. We try to like, you know, repaint the picture of like what it's really going to look like, not what they're showing us. But one thing that we had never historically done was, you know, dig through historic credit files, right? Like this was a bigger operator. We just assumed that for the most part, they do things on the up and up, and didn't really anticipate that this would really be a pump and up strategy. And the reason why I didn't think that is that when we're going to sell a property, we continue running it how we're going to run it. Like we don't change anything because it might not sell, right? We're just going to continue with the value add plan and the plan that we had set forth, and we're not going to change our credit standards. We're just going to keep chugging along as status quo. And so we don't do that. We don't play that game, but this one ultimately, you know, bit us a little bit because we didn't anticipate that was going to be the case. So again, we pulled some recent reports that have basically confirmed as much that, you know, to Todd's point, what used to be 8 to 12 turns a month is now down to 3 to 6. And what we identified is that of the folks that we put in over the last 2 years, the majority are still there living. And those that are being evicted or moving out or being kicked out are the ones that were essentially put in, you know, in the year to year and a half leading up to us buying the property. So again, I think moving forward, again, we all learn from, I'm not going to call it a mistake. It's just an area that we didn't underwrite to, you know, fully, is that now we got part of the process where we dig into the credit files, right? Like we take a look at, maybe not every single file, but we take a look at like, what are your credit standards, kind of build a profile around that. Like, are you putting, you know, do you even have a credit standard, right? Like first and foremost, are you pulling credit loan folks? Are you doing background checks? You know, we do sex offender checks and all that kind of stuff, but we're diving a little deeper just to ensure that we don't step into another situation like that. But even with all that being said, Brian, that wouldn't have changed our interest in buying this property, right? So like there's always going to be a little bit of a gotcha. There's always going to be a challenge that you don't anticipate. But I mean, overall, like I said, like Brian said, we're slightly ahead of schedule. Yes, we've had some hiccups, had some challenges, but like to be expected. And we're thriving in other areas, right? And we knew that it was going to be a multi-year process. Like this wasn't going to be a 1 to 2 year turnaround. This was going to be, we originally modeled it as really a 4-year mark. We've got a 5-year loan in place. And so we marked it as getting by the end of year 4, getting the majority of the plan in place, and then ultimately refinancing in between that year 4 and 5 mark out of our current debt and doing a cash out refinance. So,
So go ahead, Tom.
Can I just say real quick, folks like Ridgebrook. The residents love living there. What you see, we don't have folks leaving the community because, mass exodus because they want to get out of there or whatnot. This is a community that 90 to 95% of all move-outs are a result of eviction due to non-payment aspect. And other folks we'll come across somebody who's recently, on the sex offender list or something like that where we'll give the non-renewals and stuff like that. But the key part here is, to Kevin's point, when we started tracking folks that were moving in, and over the last several years, like folks just are not leaving the community because they're not happy. The folks that are leaving are traditionally the ones that were still doing cleanup mode from back before, up until some recent evictions, mostly just for down payment, for non-payment. And I think that speaks volumes to where we're going with the community, right?
I agree.
But, yeah, and let me just add one more thing. I think it just hits the point home. What I kind of share with my slide is like, we know the Fort Wayne market, it's incredibly strong. It's literally one of the fastest growing cities in the Midwest. They've got a diverse employment base there, lots of job growth. There's over $1 billion that they poured recently into their downtown area. It's a thriving secondary market. It's it's surely not as large as Indianapolis, but it's got strong economic diversity, and we believe in that market for many, many years to come, right? And so this is kind of the function of, I can't change the market, right? But we believe in the market. We believe in Fort Wayne. Other big operators are, the biggest competitors in the space also believe in Fort Wayne. So we knew that the foundational piece of it was there. And again, back to my original point, like as long as the market's strong, I can fix all the broken elements of the community. I can get the folks out that shouldn't be there, the ones that were put in there by the prior ownership group, and we know that because we know that if we get them out, the folks that don't want to pay their rent, don't want to pay their bills, that there's plenty of other folks waiting in line that do want to pay and want to be responsible and live in a clean, safe, and quiet place. So again, I believe in the long term of Ridgebrook, and it's one of those things you got to work through the challenge. Every deal's got its own challenges. This one just happens to be 7x the size of every other deal we have, and so the challenges are 7x. So, but just a function of time. Time heals all wounds.
Yeah, agreed, and I couldn't agree more. It's kind of nice to, after digging into the numbers in a really deep, granular manner, understanding how our residents that we've brought in are comparing to the residents that we inherited, ultimately gave us a lot of confidence that over the long term we'd be in still a very good position. It takes a long time to cycle through the current base of residents that we inherited, but again, we can see the writing on the wall and the light at the end of the tunnel in this one. It just takes a little bit of time to cycle through all of that. But given that fact that we'd uncovered some difficulties along the way, and we were struggling in the first few quarters and jumping into some hurdles, walk through the utility recapture perspective and maybe how we made a decision to kind of slow that process, some of the additional hurdles that you uncovered after we acquired the deal, and walk through the decision on the utility recapture and kind of where we're at today and where we're going moving forward. Todd, why don't you grab that, bud?
Yeah, so let me just talk about where we're at with recapture. We'll let Kev talk about afterwards, after acquisition and that time frame. One of the layers that we peeled back shortly after acquisition was the fact that, something's going on with our utility recapture, especially in the water sewer aspect of it. 700 units. These are all individualized metered units. It's not a RUB system. It's not something where they're just taking the average and then dividing it across the community, right? These are all individuals. So we had to go out there one at a time and visually inspect, understand what's going on with each one of these individual meters. And what we've come to determine was half the meters, so they use a water system where all the readings report back into this report, and then that's how they bill back. And we found that over half of the meters were unassigned or were signed to different properties. So for instance, this meter was sitting in lot A, but really it was assigned to lot 25 and whatnot. So that was the first issue, is we had to understand better what the water meters were actually telling us. And then secondly, as we were going through there, we understood that half those meters didn't work. They're just sitting there. So basically, we were not recapturing any of that recapture there. And then the third and final is infrastructure lines, right? Understanding that there were minor leaks throughout the park that we needed to fix quickly, so that we can control that leakage, so that we can get that recapture back.
Yeah, so, and I'll elaborate a little bit, as far as what we looked at on like the front side. So whenever we see a property, their historicals had showed, and I don't have the exact numbers, but like they weren't recapturing, 100% of the water sewer charges back to the residents. They were, if I recall, it was somewhere probably in the mid 60 range, maybe low 70s. And so in our eyes, we see that as an opportunity. Obviously, we got to figure out the reason why they're not recapturing it. It could be a litany of things. A lot of times what we find is that the reason not recapturing 100% is they just don't have great enforcement on their collections, right? They might be collecting rent, but they don't have a system in place to where basically your rent that you pay gets applied to your rent last, to where it's got to pay for utilities and all that stuff, because you can't evict someone for not paying their water and sewer bill. So typically you want to set up your charge system to where if they give you $700, the first 50 of that's going towards their water and sewer, and the remainder is going towards their rent, because you can evict if they choose not to pay the entire amount owed on a monthly basis. You can evict them for the rent piece. So, so what we see a lot of times, operators don't do that, and so they just end up with like this, poor collections and recapture rate on the water and sewer charges. They're not getting 100% back of what they're paying, because they've got some residents that are just selectively maybe paying the rent but not paying their water and sewer. So again, we see it as an opportunity. We did not anticipate that it was going to be such a convoluted mess. And there was no way for us to really figure that out in the front end until we actually got in and started diving in and looking at the ID numbers and realizing that it was an absolute mess. They had, like he said, they had meters that were meter at 123 Main Street was tied to a street across the park and vice versa. A lot of them that weren't working, they weren't functioning properly. And so, but again, we always identify that as an opportunity. That's an area that we're a little behind the mark on. If I want to kind of hit us a little bit on like what we haven't done based on what we outlined in pro forma, we had hoped that we would get to at least you never get to 100% recapture. It just doesn't happen, especially with older infrastructure. You're going to have line leaks and things like that. But we had anticipated that we were going to get to 90% or greater recapture by year 2, and we're not there yet. We're still working through those challenges. We know what the challenges are. We've got a solution for it. Now it's just a function of time to get all those pieces of the puzzle in place and fixed, and basically charging the correct amount and collecting the right amount. So, but again, we still an opportunity for us. We didn't pay for that recapture amount. So while we're going through challenges and it costs us money to solve the problem, every dollar of that recaptured amount goes to the bottom line. So we get rewarded when we fix the problem. We knew the problem was there. We just didn't know how deep the problem was. So.
No, love every bit of it. So let's maybe transition to kind of looking forward here as we progress. We've identified now a handful of things that I would consider to be opportunities. We still have 100 vacant lots inside of the community that we could ultimately infill. We now know we need to turn some of the remaining residents to ultimately get our credit quality folks in and ultimately focus on the utility recapture along the way as we progress. But kind of walk us through that vision for the next handful of years and how we ultimately drive value in the portfolio. Maybe speaking first to the 100 lot infill. Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, so our plan is this year in 26 that we're bringing in 25 homes into Ridgebrook. And then the goal is over the next 3 years, we will, 27, 28, 29, we'll bring in 25 additional each year. So our goal is to have that 100 occupied within a 4-year span. And then year 5 would be just any loose items, meaning if we had to demo any homes or, home moved out for whatever reason, something like that, that we would infill those lots at that time. So this year will be our first home infill at Ridgebrook for this. And then just touch on the recapture real quick. I just want to touch on it. The good part is, you heard us, is we've went through and reallocated all of those water meters now in the park, so they're all actually reading correctly. We've replaced all of those broken meters, and starting in March of this year, we will now actually recapture sewer, which is entail about a $240,000, $250,000 recapture annually for the organization. So
yeah, drops right to the bottom line.
Yeah, no, I just the infill piece of it. So that's another area. Again, I like to kind of put a light on the areas where we maybe missed the mark, right? And you're never going to be perfect. Pro forma's never going to be exactly right. And while we have exceeded it from an NOI perspective, we've done other things exceedingly well, but, an area where maybe, from an underwriting perspective to what actually played out where we missed the mark is those 25 homes. Now we're into year two, into year three. We've had 2 full years into year three. We closed on it December of 23? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. But we had anticipated the first year would be put all the fires out. There was a number of vacant homes that we knew we were going to have to turn that were already in there, abandoned homes we'd have to get titles for. And so we didn't anticipate bringing any new homes in for that first year because we knew that we had our hands full already, with what was already there. And so obviously, as you can tell, like we're now on the third year, not in the second year. And so we've basically missed 1 year of infill, but we weren't ready for it. If we'd have brought 25 homes in last year, we'd have been shooting ourselves in the foot. We'd have basically been competing against ourselves internally for getting the existing homes that were already there occupied while we had new homes on site and just sitting there vacant. So it wasn't the right move. It was a strategic move for us to wait. And so now we're back on the bus. We've got the 25 coming in, and I anticipate that we'll be able to, we kind of gave ourselves a buffer, right? We got a 5-year loan. We gave ourselves a buffer that we would have the business plan done by end of year 4. And so more than likely, it'll probably back up right to the point in time when we're going to go refinance. But again, we had a little bit of a buffer there, and I feel very confident that we'll be able to fulfill the plan in that time frame.
Yeah. So I'll round it out here as we are heading to lunch. But when we bought this transaction, we were about $43 million, I believe, right, the purchase price of this respective asset. And at this juncture in the 2-year pro forma, we were hoping to be right around $2.85 million in NOI. Last year, we were at 2.9. So even with all the ups and downs and hullabaloo and struggles that we've had, we're on pace with the NOI. And if you take that at a 5.5 cap, we're in the low $50 million range in terms of the market value of this respective property today, knowing full well we have significantly larger room to run on the loss to lease recapture, 100 different lots that we can infill over time, the ability to build back for additional sewer along the way, and a good chunk of that value will be realized in the next few years. Just running quick math, right? If you've got 100 lots that you can infill, and every lot is trading right now around $80,000, that's another $8 million of value, intrinsic value in that asset that we know that we can control in due time. It won't happen overnight. We've seen the problems. We know the plan to go ahead and fix it, and we're just going to continue to plod forward, one foot in front of the other, executing in an effort to never stop adding value to the property, knowing along the way that the residents are living a much better life today than they were when we took the property over. So with that, I hope that provides you a little bit of insight in terms of how we steward capital along the way and try to be stewards to the human beings that are living inside of the communities as well. The strategy that we put in place at acquisition to ensure that we have a margin of safety and a solid structure in terms of the capital stack that ultimately leads to stability in the portfolio over the long term. This has been an exceedingly challenging deal, but even through all that, we're still in a very, very good position. So with that, we'll round out and we'll head to lunch. Thank you so much, guys.